Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this tutorial, we're going to look at setting some values in the bitmap headers so that hopefully in the next tutorial we can get on to actually writing a completely black bitmap. By the way, if you notice a strange sound at the end of the last tutorial, that was me rubbing my hands together in excitement because we're finally getting to the point where we can actually do something and see it working. Okay, so let's take a look. We've got this pointer now that points at a block of memory, and one thing that I'm going to just change here before we get onto the main subject of this tutorial is I want this unique pointer to have the memory that it's pointed at initialized to zeros. So in C++11 I can do that if I type curly brackets after this uint memory allocation here. So that in C++11 will initialize this memory to all zeros. Alternatively, I think it was in 2004 that it was introduced into C++ that you could do this. So round brackets will do the same thing. This is a bit like calling a constructor on each of the ints that you're creating there, each of the 8-bit integer types that we're creating there. So because I'm using C++11, I'll use round brackets. If you're using a previous version of C++ here, I'll use curly brackets. If you're using a previous version of C++, like before 2004, or whenever they added the support for the round brackets, then you would have to call here perhaps memset to initialize all that memory to 0. But we'll use the more modern way of doing that here in this tutorial. So now moving on to the write method here, I'm going to actually use the info header and file header that I created in a earlier tutorial. So here at the top, I'm going to include, this is in bitmap.cpp, I'm going to include bitmap info header.h, and I'm also going to include bitmap file header.h. And because I put those in the namespace cave of programming, I'm going to have to say using namespace cave of programming, unless I want to prefix all my structs and classes here with cave of programming : which I really don't want to have to do that. So in the write method, this is where we're basically going to write the file header to the file. We're going to write the info header, and then we're going to write the bitmap data, but we'll take a look at that hopefully in the next tutorial. Before we do that, we've got a few things to set in our headers. So let's create here a bitmap info header, which I could call bitmap info header, something short and snappy like that. Since I will give it a longer name if this was going to be a really long function where I might lose track of this, because it's going to be a relatively small amount of code. Hopefully we won't forget what BIH actually means. And I'm going to say bitmap file header. I'll put that first just because it comes first in the file, and let's call that bitmap bfh, like that. So I've got one of those each. Just check that compiles. Be on the safe side. We've just got these unused value warnings. So the first thing I need to do here is in my file header. In fact, I've already changed my mind. Let's call this file header. I'm just referring to some code that I wrote earlier, and it's much nicer what I did last time. Call that info header. Okay, so in the file header, we need to set a field file size, and that what is the size of the entire file? Well, it's going to be the size of the bitmap file header. So we're just using the size of operator here, plus size of the bitmap info header, because we're also going to write that to the file, plus all of our data. And the data is going to be the number of pixels, so let's add that on, which is width times height, times 3, because every pixel will take up 3 bytes. So that should do for that. Oh yeah, of course, these are member variables, and I called them m underscore width and m underscore height. And those are going to be set by the constructor. They're passed into the constructor here. And we initialize from the constructor parameters. So we're going to know how wide and how high our actual bitmap is. Then we're going to have to set something called the data offset in the file header. That looks like this, data offset. And that is the distance from the beginning of the file to where the data actually starts. So that's going to be simply the size of the file header plus the size of the info header. So let's just copy this and paste that in, and after that our data starts. So it's just telling whatever reads the bitmap, whichever image viewer you open it with, where the actual bitmap data is immediately located. Then we need to set info header. So that was the file header that contains information about the file. The info header contains information about the bitmap. We've already set, of course, some of these values when we actually created the headers in the first place, but there are a few that we can only figure out here. And we need to set the info header.width equal to, no prizes for guessing, we're going to set it to the actual width of the file, and the info header.height has got to be equal to the height of the bitmap. So this is just information about the bitmap, this is information about the file. Now that we've done that, all we need is some basically standard code to write binary data to a file, and we can write that bitmap to a file, and we can check that we can actually open our completely black bitmap in some kind of image viewer. And we'll take a look at that in the next tutorial. So until next time, happy coding.